You're either climbing the corporate ladder or saving the world. I mean, right? My next guest may not agree. She is currently the CEO for the global ad agency McCann World Group China and previously served as the CMO for Starbucks China. But she has also opened her home to over 16 at-risk youth and believes that anyone can discover their social legacy at the intersection of offense and offer. Now, before you go thinking you already know what this chick is all about, let me just tell you something that she does in her spare time. She likes to, redefine comfort by doing things like learning to play the Afro-Peruvian drum and do a 24-hour survival course, hiking, climbing, and rappelling 40 miles, and killing and eating a wild mountain chicken. Yeah, that happened. Today is part one of our chat, and she's going to explain how the spare room became the cornerstone to her social legacy, housing over 16 young people, writing a book, and giving a handful of TED Talks. Authentic purpose finder, brand builder, corporate mogul with a humanitarian heart, Emily Chang. Welcome.
Thank you. I think that's the most interesting introduction I've ever heard.
Well, I do aim to please, so I'm glad to hear that. I thought you were interesting before, but once I realized that, enterprising corporate Emily was also humanitarian Emily, and then the, jumping out of helicopter Emily, I was like, well, that seals the deal. This lady is my new spirit animal. You
And then my life is complete.
Yes, right. Yeah, there was so much about that. I was like, this is completely aspirational for me. So I'm so excited
Oh,
that we met. And I love how you and your family have taken hospitality just to the next level. So I would love for you to tell us about the first time that your kind of purpose led approach led to opening up your spare room.
of course. And you're right, Meredith. It is a family affair completely now, but it started back when I was still single, before I had married my husband, and certainly well before my daughter Lainey was born. I was still in undergraduate in upstate New York. And I was driving home late one night. I was one of those enterprising kids who put myself through college, was working three jobs, wanted to be a TA for organic chemistry because deep inside I'm a big fat nerd and I absolutely love math and science. And it was like 8:30 at night on a wintry evening in upstate New York. So for anybody who's been in that area, it's just miserable weather. It's this horrible, slushy, dirty stuff that's coming out of the sky. I hadn't eaten dinner. I was coming back from teaching a class. I hadn't even started any of my homework or my labs. And I was paused at a red light. And it's like habit because there's this one light on, I think it's Genesee Street, that's particularly long. So you sit back and settle in. And I kind of just looked out the window real quick. And then I just did one of those double takes because there's this little silhouette sitting on the side of the road. And when I say on the side of the road, like on the curb with her feet in the street and hunched over and just such a small figure, looking very female. And so I kind of stared and realized that she was like, you could see her shoulders. She was sobbing. So I unrolled my window as you did back then when we had windows that unrolled like so.
Right.
And I shouted out into the night, like, hey, are you okay? And I remember this little girl just slowly lifted up her face. She was Asian, so it even kind of touched my heart a little more. Asians also look young. So she looked like anywhere as young as 8 years old. And she spat out, fuck you. And I was like, oh, okay. But you could, even despite the sort of aggressive reaction, you could see she had a swollen lip, she had a swelling eye, and she was just shivering. I mean, it was freezing cold. I think she was in one of those oversized hoodies, which very ironically right now is in again with kids because it is about 20 years later. Anyway, long story short, I was able to convince her to just get in my car or walk down the street and I would buy her dinner. We went to, I think it was either a Friendly's or a Perkins, those diners that are
Oh,
on every
yeah.
street corner.
Perkins.
I love those places. Yes. And she wouldn't speak to me, but she did order food and coffee, diner coffee. And we sat there and had a meal. And I remember she was just dripping. She was like dripping gray rainwater in a puddle around her seat. And I will admit, I felt so badly for this girl, but I didn't have any objective other than like, I feel like I should feed her because, that's what women do. And then, I will also just be really transparent and say, I was a little embarrassed. Like we're sitting in this diner, they placed us in the middle of the restaurant, and I was sort of exchanging looks with the waitress, like, it was a very awkward situation. Because the one thing I never want anyone to think is, wow, you're a really nice person. Because I don't think I am. I think I was a little bit condescending. I was a little like, what have I done? There's this, battered, dripping girl who's being too super rude to me. And then as soon as she finished eating, she just stood up and started to walk away. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say goodbye. I still didn't know her name. And as she started walking away, I'm looking at her. She has nothing on her. She has no bag. She's going back out into that weather. And I just remember shouting at her receding back as she was walking by the cash register, like, hey, where are you going to stay tonight? And I remember she stopped and you could see her shoulders just shaking. So she was listening. And I just said, I've got a spare room. I just didn't know what else to say. And the funny thing is I didn't. I was living in a studio apartment, tiny. And I remember when I did bring her into my apartment, she looked around, she's like, there ain't no spare room here. I was like, yes, you were right. I have a couch. You can take a shower. We were about the same size. And like within 10 minutes, she was flat out dead asleep. And the next day I learned her name, and I learned that, like me, she was an Asian child to immigrant parents. Her parents were really tough on her. We often call them tiger parents because they want the best things for us. They motivate by yelling and comparing us to our cousins and telling us we're not good enough. And she'd come home with a bad grade, and her parents basically said, "Get out! You're worthless. We're wasting our money on you. We want to spend it on your little brother." And
Wow.
I think a lot of people hear those words, and over time you realize that's not what they mean. They're trying to make me better. I can't say I ever appreciated that kind of upraising, but I can say I knew they didn't want me to actually run out into the streets and leave. I think she just took it so to heart and she ran away. And very soon, after living at her friends' houses for a couple of days, she ended up in a college fraternity, staying with a boy who took her virginity. And then when he found out she was only 14, he kicked her out. And then she went out into the streets. And, very soon she's learning how to steal food to survive and make a I don't know, make a little life for herself, and the night that I saw her, she was trading sexual favors for a place to stay. And the guy started beating her up. She had left her backpack with all of her remaining belongings and run out into the street. She tripped over a curb and fell. And that's where I found her.
Oh my gosh.
And she ended up staying with me for months. She ended up staying almost through the end of spring, because it was almost, it was winter, and then we went into Christmas and New Year's, and it took a while to get to know each other and for her to open up to me and tell me a little bit more about her story. And for everything that felt so tough in her life, which is why she ran away, everything that happened after was way tougher. And you just realized how easy it is for somebody to fall through the cracks of a social justice system, even one that is, relatively in a developed country. And at that point, I realized, like, look, she's still a kid. She has to go back to school. She refused to go back to her parents. I didn't know what to do. So we kind of muddled through it and figured out a place for her to stay. And she ended up, I stayed in touch with Leah until she graduated from high school. And I got to go watch her walk across the stage, and get her diploma. I'm not going to cry this early in a podcast, I promise. And then, eventually we lost touch, but that was the first kid. And it wasn't like I had a positive intention and wanted to do something philanthropic. Honestly, I think I just saw something that I couldn't keep driving. And one thing turned into the other. And it was the best gift ever, because it taught me it's not that hard to do something. And if it's like, if you'd stopped and said, you know what, you're going to pick up a kid off the street, it's just going to stay with you for months, I'd be like, you are out of your mind. There's no way. I have 3 jobs. I'm going through college. But one thing leads to another, and you suddenly realize you're capable of way more than you think you are. And I think because I stumbled into that, I just became really bold. Like, what is the worst that can happen? That game, worst case scenario? Truly, when you start realizing the worst case scenario is something I can absolutely live with, but look at what the best case scenario could be, you just realize that fear doesn't hold you back anymore.
That's so true. And as I read some of these stories in your book, I realized that my assumption about what these arrangements looked like was not correct. These are not happy or even outwardly grateful children in most cases. And And I'm sure that they are grateful now, but, the first assumption that you corrected was, hey, I'm not just like a bleeding heart person, and then the second assumption was what I was confronting with myself is this is not like, oh, thank you, Emily, and then it's like these are hard, heartbreaking situations. So my question is, how did you keep going through that, even though how did you decide to keep on doing it, even though it is heart wrenching at times?
I think when something keeps happening in your life and you're not actively looking for it, somebody asked me the other day, they're like, oh, so how long have you been foster parents? And I said, we've never been foster parents. We've never registered. We've never reached out to try to do anything like that. Young people and babies and children just end up like literally, I can tell you one story where they ended up on our doorstep. In another case, a stranger stopped my husband in the street and we ended up with a teenager who was raised in a brothel. Like this happens over and over again. So I think what happened is early on, I stumbled into something where I realized this is not hard for me. And some other things are very hard, but this, just inviting someone to have a place to stay, is not hard. And I really enjoy like sharing my home, and I enjoy giving. Like my love language is giving 100%. In fact, if I showed you what I'm standing next to, this is like my gift closet. I hoard gifts. I don't hoard a whole lot of stuff. I hoard gifts, and like my language is like, I go in here and each cubby, I might have to send you a picture later, is like itemized by like the kind of person or specific people. And like I see something that I'll think of you and be like, Meredith will love this, and I just buy it. And I'm like, okay, next occasion I'll whip it out and be like, I've been waiting 6 months to give this thing to you. So for me, it's my love language. I love to give anyway, and everybody has a different love language, and that's totally fine. But then I think the other thing is, when it keeps happening, you realize something magical is sort of going on. So it's not hard. It's not hard for you. And it just keeps showing up. And then for you, it's just a really simple response. Is it yes or no? You can say no thanks and keep moving on. Or you can be like, this is very bizarre. Here's another one. How am I going to say no? And I was talking to my daughter the other day. We started doing what I'm calling taxi chats, like little interviews of our family about the spare room kids. And my taxi chat question was, what would be your reaction next time we come across somebody who needs our spare room? And I was actually pretty curious what my daughter would say, because she's now in seventh grade and, awkward. She values her privacy. She looked at me and she just went, yes.
Oh.
And she didn't have anything else. She was like, of course, Mom. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So yeah, I think it's a combination of, early on, you find what your love language is, or, in the book, I call it like your offer. What's the unique thing that you have to bring to the world? And this is not like a heartbreaking, gut wrenching, bitter thing that you're sacrificing. It's something that you give freely because it's something you love to give, right? And you're in the middle of your joy when you're giving it. And then, like the world finds a way to keep giving you that opportunity to give. So that's what makes it easy to say yes.
I see the difference now that you've explained that it's not, you're not saying everyone should open up their spare room and force themselves through this, what could be uncomfortable. You're saying find what your like metaphoric spare room is, and
Totally.
you already have clues in your life by who you are, your love language, your interest, and in your book you talk about what offends you, what bothers you, and then
Right.
you just kind of follow the trail to your social legacy. So can you kind of explain more about what that word means, social legacy?
Yeah, I think at one point I was just talking about like purpose. I feel like this is something our family was designed to do. But purpose is such a big phrase. It's maybe somewhat overused and it's somewhat ambiguous. So I was trying to think about like, okay, let's be articulate and let's be intentional about what we mean. What's a better phrase? And I landed on social legacy for two reasons. So let's break apart the phrase. On legacy, it's simply what you leave behind, right? And and for me, it's like, how do you leave things better than you found them? And for our family, it's a very small thing, right? It's 16 kids. Hopefully they each grow up and they touch other people and there's an amplification effect, but it's only 16. We're not touching millions of people or we're not impacting countries and improving the environment at large. Like we're actually really small in what we do. But I think where we're touching people, we're leaving them better than we found them.
Mm.
And then as I was interviewing other people for the book, I started realizing legacy is the right word because there are people leaving societies, leaving online forums, leaving the environment, leaving India, leaving wherever they are so much better than if they hadn't been there. So legacy is how I landed on that word. And then social was really because I mentioned all those different places. It's online. Some people's community, they would say, is really the online chat forum. Some would say, yeah, my community is entirely my social media. Others would define community as my workplace because that's where I spend the bulk of my time, or my neighborhood. That's really what I care the most about. There's a guy, Robert, who shared a story with me, and it's actually it didn't make the book because there were some stories that were sort of similar in theme. But for him, it was all about his immediate physical neighborhood where his son was growing up. And then for other people, it's broader. So in the book, we also end each chapter with specific exercises. And when you're defining your social legacy, I help define what do you define as social for you? Is it something as small as your family unit, your neighborhood, your state, your country? Is it the world? Is it bigger than the world? We're now on Mars, and then if you put those two words together, then if you know how you define social for you, and then you know what the idea of legacy is, the two things together become how you're going to leave your meaningful impact that's specific to you, what you feel like you have to offer, and the thing that really you feel like you want to address or you feel called to address in this world.
Wow, that's so beautiful. I love how customized and specific that is to each person. And a question that I thought of was, how is this different than a corporate responsibility? But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you kind of just answered that, because when I think of corporate responsibility, I think about resume builders. I think about something that you push through and, it's heartbreaking and grueling and monotonous, but you do it because, you feel like it does make a difference, but it's also something that you want to put on your resume, or you want to communicate to your clients or customers, look, we're so responsible as a corporation. We care about X and Y. So
Yeah.
am I spot on, or is there is there more differences to highlight between corporate responsibility and social legacy?
Yeah, I think they're totally different. That's an interesting question. And I'll tell you, you sparked a thought. Where the spare room came from very originally was my friend Yarrow Craner, who leads Hatch, which I love. It's Hatch a Better World. He was at a very corporate event where I was speaking on stage. And it just happened that, as I sometimes do, I took the conversation a little student body left. And, we're in front of I think it's at C2 in Montreal. It was 4,000 people right here in the audience. And Will Travis, who's another wonderful friend, was moderating. And suddenly I started talking about but who are you authentically as a human being, And what do you do? For me, I talked about one kid in our spare room. And I said, he's living here with me now. So it really frames, I can't remember exactly the conversation, but it really frames everything that goes on at work. Everything we do cannot be because it's the right corporate thing. It's gotta be congruent with our brand's purpose. And that's where things resonate, and people, consumers will realize you're doing something that's meaningful, that's congruent with who you are, and it's something that comes from the heart of who you are as a company. And I was saying you can't be a leader for that kind of company unless you know who you are as an individual. So I said this on stage. Will was sort of okay. He was wonderful and rolled with it. Yarrow was in the audience. He invited me to come share at Hatch. And he's like, I don't want anything corporate. In fact, just so you know, I don't even normally invite corporate people. I remember being at Hatch and meeting people from Hollywood, people from nonprofits, people from government organizations, really fascinating, interesting entrepreneurs, a very different group. And I did feel very humbled because there weren't any corporate people there. So when I went, he's like, I just want to be really clear. I don't want you to talk about anything corporate. I want you to talk about what you talked about on stage just now. I want people to know that there are people from corporations who can talk like that. And I was like, oh, so you want me to talk about that kid? And he was like, yeah, that'd be good. And so when I went on stage at Hatch, it was just a couple hundred people and a really curated, amazing group of humans. I talked about the kids.
Mm.
And out of that, I think he asked me, what do you want to call this session? And I was like, the kids. And he's like, you're in marketing. And I think I ended up with the spare room.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
so like it's not something for a resume, right? I think everybody I've worked with over time has always known me. There's always been somebody in our room. So people know it's part of my life, but it's certainly, to your point, not a resume builder.
Hmm.
It wasn't part of even my identity and who I am. It's just a part of my life. But like because of Yarrow and Hatch, I had an opportunity to tell a story. And I started to realize then this seems to resonate with people. And if it's something that I can share that's really positive, I hope it becomes something that amplifies. But I also feel it's a very individual, to your previous comment, it's a very personalized sort of journey and experience and identity. So it's sort of in that way the opposite of anything corporate.
Absolutely. And what I love is I love paradoxes. I don't know if I told you this
Yeah.
before, but I
No.
love, you know, a bear. It's interesting. A unicycle. Yeah, it's okay. But a bear on a unicycle, it's really interesting, right? So it's like a paradox.
Yeah.
And I feel like you're a bear on a unicycle because because you're this like amazing corporate achiever, and but you also are curious enough about the world to want to learn what you don't know and to experience what you haven't experienced. But you're also a family person, and I'm just imagining all the hats that you wear, and yet you are still committed to living this intentional part and authentic part of the legacy that you want to leave. And it doesn't get cut out just because things get busy. And I feel like that is so inspiring.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to change my business card title. I like Bear on a Unicycle much better.
Well, as we wrap up, I have one more question for you, and
Sure.
it's kind of related, but it's kind of not. I I see so much of my life in what I want to live in the way that you're living. I am intensely curious, and I have, my husband says I have hopelessly huge amounts of FOMO because I'm like, what? I don't speak that language. I must learn it tomorrow. Like it's just in me to learn these things and do these things and to also achieve, and I see all of that in aspects of your life. So my question is, how do you honor both the enterprising part of yourself that really values P&Ls, profit and loss, but also the creative heart-led part of yourself that values that outside the box thinking and following your intuition? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I recently, my friend invited me to New Zealand to go speak at his event, and my topic was the art of paradox. So I'll have to share that with you later. But I
Oh, please,
love the
yeah.
power of and. Yeah, I think the power of and unlocks so much, right? There's this experience that often people in improv use, which is yes and instead of but. And it's a really fun exercise. It's very mind opening. I also think it's very true in life. It's yes and. And I think what keeps us from often saying yes and goes back to the very first topic you and I touched on, which is fear. The only reason we don't say yes and something is we're fearful of what we're stepping into. But again, I think for me, I always go to the worst case scenario. I had a friend, Andy, at Apple, and we were often planning our product launches and new store openings. And I was always like, okay, you guys, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? So whenever I called him, I realized this one day because I texted him, and my name came up on his phone. And he actually had the worst case scenario board game image instead of my face. And I was like, dude, he's like, you always ask about the worst case scenario. I was like, oh, it's true. Because I think for me, that's my way to grapple with what fear is holding me back. And if it's unidentified fear, all the more humans shy away from it. But if I can identify there's fear that's holding me back, and then I can identify what that fear is, suddenly it just dissolves because you're like, yeah, that's not that bad. So for me, the art of paradox is really important because it's about finding that and I think what holds us back from finding the and is fear. And so to answer your question, super long answer, sorry, I think it's finding the intersection between purpose and profit. It is saying, yeah, I really like running commercial businesses. I get a thrill when we win something, and I love making money for my company. That's my job. And I do that by coaching and developing people and watching them thrive. And like that gives me great joy. You can earn money in many ways. You can be a slave driver, you can be a really challenging boss, you can, beat people half to death to make them kind of eke out that last bit of work, or you can be the kind of leader that people like working for. So I had thought about in the back half of my career, do I move to nonprofit? Do I stop working corporately at all and really just like write and speak? I love doing that stuff too. But I realized I'm good at the commercial stuff and I really love work. I love what I do. And I can do that job and also build into people. It doesn't mean I have to go completely into a different space. So for me, that was a very fulfilling observation about my life because I really did explore the gamut. I had explored and really kind of went to the end stage of working for a nonprofit as their chief growth officer and thought, yeah, I can come in every day and serve this amazing purpose. And I sit on a board of a nonprofit. But at the end of the day, I still feel that I serve an amazing purpose in my job at McCann. And I found a company that has great DNA and it's an ethos I share. And regardless that we're making money and we're a for-profit company, I still get to build into 400 people every day. I get to work for a company I believe in, and we get to build interesting social dialogue by helping brands play meaningful roles. So I'm like, oh, that's actually really congruent for me.
Wow. My head is so, my head is spinning. I'm like, this is so amazing. I feel like we met for a reason. And I'm so thrilled about delivering this message to my listeners because I think that they will cherish it as much as I have. And I'm so thrilled also that we're going to do a part 2 of this episode where we're going to dive in more into how to discover your social legacy by taking a closer look at the intersection of offense and offer. But before we wrap up this episode, can you tell people where they can find you online and definitely your TED Talks and your book?
Yeah, sure. I think the one-stop shop is my website, which is www.social-legacy.com. I have links to where you can pre-order the book, and then the book is going live on April 6th. So it's available for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Walmart.com, and then it'll be for sale everywhere. And I'm super psyched because we're also launching an ebook version and we're launching an audio version. And I just got to meet my narrator recently and had some really lovely conversations with her too. So it'll be available soon. I'm on LinkedIn. And people I would welcome to reach out and ask any other questions or engage because that's a lot of the fun of why I'm on social media.
That's so awesome. Well, thank you again, Emily. That's a wrap. That was amazing. Woo! Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more bright, meaningful entertainment, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell.